The next step, we made a request to Arkis's risk management team to link our margin account to our Binance spot account through Arkis's DMA. Now, Arkis's margin engine can see both legs of trade, both assets on spot and futures account on Binance sub account and assets on the margin account. As you can see now, the portfolio summary and risk factor did not change a lot. But if we take a look at the constituents of the portfolio of the smart contract, we can see that actually there was a transfer to Binance sub account. If we go to Binance's interface, we can see that USDC has been transferred to the sub account, and it's been already tracked by Arkis's margin engine. Now let's take a look of what happens if we will open a short position in Ethereum by making our trade delta neutral. Because in this case, if we take a look at the token holdings, we can see that we have rsETH available on our account, which is essentially Ethereum, and ideally we'd like to take a short position to make our trade completely delta neutral. Now, as you can see, we have a short position in Ethereum on our margin account, on our Binance sub account. And let's see how our risk factor was updated when our position from a directional, by just holding ETH and DC, becomes completely delta neutral, because our Ethereum exposure is completely hedged by the short position on ETH USDT. We can now see that our risk factor improved from 183 to almost 2, because we have now opened a short position, and by opening this short, we have improved both stress tested value, the risk factor, by making our position delta neutral. Let's play around with the Ethereum position to see what happens to our margin account and our risk factor when we become more directional in our exposure. Let's take a look at what happens that instead of opening a just short position, we will open a bigger short, which will make our position more directional and biased towards a short position in Ethereum relative to USDC than a delta neutral position. Now let's sell more contracts for 100 USDT on ETH. We have submitted our order. Now you can see that we have a long position in rsETH for $100, and we have a short position for $200 on ETH USDT. Let's take a look what happens to our stress tested value and to our risk factor when our position becomes short biased compared to delta neutral. We can now see that our margin, risk factor has dropped, because now we can see that our position is short biased. Let's take a look what happens when we make our position long biased, meaning that in this case we should have a long position in 100 ETH, in 100 USD. So now we would have a long position in Ethereum and also a long position in rsETH relative to USDC. So we'll have a double directional risk on both rsETH and long position in ETH relative to USDC. We can now see that our risk factor is unchanged because our margin actually it dropped. Because in this case, our position becomes double directional, and that is why our margin engine penalizes this directional exposure. From this video, we can see on one hand how traders can open a delta neutral exposure, and Arkis's margin engine takes into account both centralized exchange futures positions and then the decentralized positions on margin account. And on the other hand, we can see that margin engine penalizes both positive bias and negative bias exposure for the positions, while the delta neutral exposure is actually not penalized, because essentially this makes trade much more secure for the lender from the risk perspective. By applying this margin technology, borrowers can open a leveraged carry trades by using yield generating collateral from DeFi as collateral to borrow from Arkis, and by opening a short position on centralized exchanges, they make their trade way more secured while still having a big capital efficiency.